Hey, Mark,
Hey, how are you?
the power of technology. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. This is my first Instagram, so thanks
Hey,
for walking me through it, everyone.
oh, no problem. And don't think that I'm an expert because at our age, probably we don't know as much about that stuff, right?
Yep,
But thanks for joining a Mass Live on Instagram. It's really exciting.
sure.
Um, people are going to join us, as you know, and that's how it works. People join, jump on, jump off. We're going to have a conversation. We later on going to edit it, and it's going to be available also on Instagram and other social medias later on. Mark, first of all, tell us a little bit about you. Um, where are you calling from? Something personal? Where do you live? Anything you want to share with us?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a licensed structural engineer. I live in Drake, Massachusetts, which is just north of Boston. I primarily practice consulting structural engineering out in the San Diego area for mostly seismic design
You
and
say San
analysis.
Diego, so actually you're based in Boston,
Yep.
but you work West Coast.
I,
Interesting.
yeah, that's where I started. I actually grew up in here, so when my family and I had kids in the San Diego area, we moved back for help for family reasons and things like that.
Gotcha. You're the only one who moved from San Diego to Boston, you know?
Yes, that wasn't a very smart move.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's great. And so you're involved with the northeast section of the design and woodwork, et cetera, right? From what I saw on your resume and your website. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, we have a regional director. That's my title.
Mhm.
In every major market of the country. So I cover the New England states and also New York, New York City.
Oh, very cool. That's great. So let me give you a little bit of background about, you know, so Amass is a marketplace for construction material. I've been a real estate developer for over 20 years and put that aside and really wanted to resolve some fundamental problems because one of the biggest challenges, and I would love to talk to you about it, is that our industry rolls trillions of dollars literally, but in so many ways it's so behind time. We don't use as much technology, we don't use marketplaces, we don't use innovation. And one of the reasons we ask you to be on it with us is because you represent and understand better as some kind of innovation. As someone who been a real estate developer for New York City for 20 years, I never built with wood, right? Two by fours was something that is we don't use. We use it for fencing as constructions happen. It's all concrete and steel and as far as I know, there's one now large multifamily building in New York being built from treated wood. Do you know about it?
There was going to be a high rise in New York, but that got shot down by the FDNY. That was years back.
Oh,
There's four six-story, well, it's three six-story, one four-story building. So there's four total. They're all in the Brooklyn area, and they're all done with a newer product called cross-laminated timber.
so
Um,
let's take a step back, okay? So because I really am clueless when it comes to that, right? So walk us as if whomever is with us today. So you're an engineer, right? And you really deal with and kind of masters the understanding of wood in usage construction. So why is it such a difference? Why, when I travel to Florida and to other areas, I see people just, cracking those buildings really fast from wood structure. When it comes to large cities like New York City, wood is not being used as often.
Yeah, so it's one thing in New York City, you're not allowed to use wood in the exterior walls, and that's just right in the building code. So
And
that's
is it
one
because
draw.
of fire codes or
Yeah,
is it
it's
original because
most
so many fires in New York?
yeah, it's
Is it?
mostly fire concerns, so they want it to be non-combustible. So
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons. On the interior of the building, you can still use light frame wood. You just need something non-combustible in the exterior. So you could use two bys, whatever wood product that you want. It's very rare that it happens in New York City. What I do see as a big push in New York City is more of the manufactured products that similar to the ones in Brooklyn. And the reason being, so the other products that I talked about, the light frame stuff, you have to cover that up for fire protection, so you
Yeah.
wouldn't see
Two
it.
hour 2 hours fire
Yeah.
rating or whatever the codes are.
Yeah, so
And
you'd look up like every other building and you'd see a gypboard ceiling, it'd be covered up. But
yeah.
the advantage of these mass timber products, there's a few different ones, but the reason why developers, architects are really pushing it in the New York City area is one, it's the look because you can expose it. So when you have a thick enough piece of wood, it actually provides the 1 or 2 hour fire rating that you need, so you can actually expose it at that point. And so that's
Yeah.
the real driver and it's also a market distinction. So for developers, 1 out of the 4 projects that we have data on in the Brooklyn area, it leased out faster and at a higher rate just because of the exposed look.
Oh, that's cool. So, Mark, is it a lack of knowledge from the Department of Building that stuck in a traditional way of thinking that concrete or steel are safer from a fire perspective? But what's the thing that keeps it in place? Why are we not working with wood? Because it
Yep.
seems to me also it's cheaper, right? Like if you look at hard cost construction in New York, we talk about three, four, $500 a square foot hard costs only. Depends union, non-union heights, etc. Um, why are we not using more wood in New York City?
Yeah, one thing is the building code. So the product that folks really want to use there right now is called, like I mentioned it before, cross-laminated timber. That's not
What is it?
currently in the it's not currently in the building code there. So I worked with the FDNY in the building department. This was a couple years back. It's going to be in the next code, which was supposed to be adopted at some point this year, but of course I don't think that might have got delayed due to COVID. So hopefully sometime early next year they'll adopt it. And I think at that point, you're going to see kind of a tipping point where I think you're going to see a lot of these buildings going up. I think so. There's 4 that are done or under construction, and there's 2 or 3 more right now. 1 or 2 in Brooklyn, 1 in Manhattan. That's going to be a museum they're trying to expose timber.
Oh, and so tell me again, talk to me as if I know nothing about this. Actually, I don't know anything about it. And amassed for us, we're about connecting buyers and sellers, right? So we're very agnostic about what we're selling. But I'm seeing substantial push around the wood material, construction material. So tell me about the challenges and the benefit of building with wood versus other material.
Yeah, so the benefits are it's not a big deal in New York City, but the environmental benefits are huge. So wood, basically, it's a misnomer that cutting a tree down is a negative thing. When you cut a tree down, it's full of about 50% by weight carbon. And so when you harvest a tree and you put that in a building, you're storing carbon in that building for the whole life of the building while you're allowing other trees to grow. So that's one of the benefits that you can't get out of concrete or steel. It's the only renewable resource that we have. The other advantage is construction speed. So if you're in a high labor area, which you guys are,
Yep.
Boston is as well,
Yeah, of
what
course.
we are
We just
seeing,
opened Boston, so I can see the similar conversation. So a man's just opened Boston, New England, and the conversation I have with supplies in the air is very similar to what you're saying right now. That labor is a huge part of the calculation, and that's why it's critical. Mm.
yeah, so what we've seen kind of, plus or minus 25 to 30% of time it saves you in construction time. So
Wow,
getting on the
that's
site
huge.
that much faster.
Mhm.
And the number of people on the site putting the timber up for these projects, it's only about 5 or 6 people. So it's not like a huge construction site. So it's almost like a skeleton crew. So it goes up quite a bit faster. That's why in like downtown Boston, New York City, it's actually more economical for these mass timber buildings than concrete and steel. But what we're finding is when you jump out to the suburbs, when you're not in a congested area, high labor costs, it actually flips a little bit. It costs a little bit more.
What costs a little bit more, the labor part or the material? Like, what's the?
Just the overall cost of the installed structure costs like 1% more or something like that, or 0.5%.
Oh, interesting. And what about installation? I mean, we spoke about fire, we spoke about the usage and saving money, especially when labor is going up in cost. And I think that's a trend we're going to see anywhere, regardless of just high, urban dense areas, because of COVID, because of immigration issues, because of a lot of other stuff. I think cost of labor versus material will keep on being a challenge. What about installation, sound insulation? How does wood compare to other material?
For you mean for thermal insulation or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Either or say, like, for example, again, speaking as someone who doesn't understand it, been a developer, but not really an engineer, sound insulation, how, like, when you build, different, like someone walking upstairs, how do you make sure concrete traditionally feels like it's a more solid way to separate sound, sound traveling, etc.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess there's 2 things. If it's a light frame building, you usually you'll have some type of topping above, plywood. Usually it's an inch and a half of concrete or gypcrete for deadening sound. And then down below, you'll have resilient channels and then chipboard, and you get like a market rate of an STC of 60, which is really high. That's a sound transmission. The code minimum is 50 for like residential. When you want to expose the wood, so for mass timber buildings, that's almost always the goal. The challenge with that is that you can't have resilient channels on the bottom, and that basically dissipates sound. And so your assembly is up above, and what it usually is a rubberized acoustomat that's placed right on the panels, and then your 1.5 or 2 inches of concrete like you'd normally have on a timber building. And that'll get you up above the sound requirements.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Now, Mark, tell me from a logistic perspective, especially because of our people, the people who are involved with the mass, it's really about the material itself. What's the resources of wood? Is wood coming only from North America, like the north part of the US and Canada, or are there other resources? What's the traveling? What's the environmental impact of traveling? Because it's a heavy material. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it comes from the Pacific Northwest, of course. They're in a Douglas fir basket out there of trees. The closest plant that we have for these products is they're up north of Montreal, so they're about 500 miles or so from us, so that's the closest. And then the other plant is down Alabama, and there's a new one that I think that's going to be in North Carolina, and so they use southern yellow pine for their material.
So they use also they look in Alabama. They use local trees for like. Okay, wow, interesting. I didn't know. And it is the entire
for a second here.
Yeah, no, it's the is the material coming from those areas and distributed across the country? I mean, is everybody making it in the Northwest and then kind of like sending it on trucks and trains, etc.? Processed already, non-processed?
Yeah, most of the projects in the Northeast are either Nordics, which is up, they're the ones north of Montreal, or actually there's another company called KLH and also Binderholz, and they're based out of Austria. And you mentioned shipping. So on the environmental impact, shipping across the Atlantic on a barge is actually less than shipping across the whole United States, believe it or not, in terms of environmental. But the shipping across the country actually isn't as bad as you think, just because of the amount of carbon that you're actually storing. So the amount of carbon that car is releasing is it's almost negligible compared to the amount that you're stacking in the building. So that really, to me, is kind of something to almost ignore. Now, the good news is there are firms that are looking at building a plant in Maine. So that's been a project that, not us, but some allies of ours have been working on for a few years now. And there's a couple of sites. So we may have a plant that's quite a bit closer to us here in the Northeast in the near future.
Yeah. Were you, just curious, were you impacted by the fires in California and north of California?
Not that I know of, because most of the trees there actually come from Oregon, Washington, and then north of Oregon and Washington as well.
Yeah. So you guys don't have any concern about running out of, we hear you and see you clearly, so it's not a problem. Okay. So you don't have a concern about material. You don't think we're going to run out of trees. Do you have an obligation? I just, again, asking completely from ignorance. Do you plant trees? Is nature give new trees? How old are the trees when you chop it? Tell us. I find it fascinating. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, it comes up. This comes up frequently. We're actually, North America, anyways, is doing it sustainably. So for every tree that you harvest and put in a building, by the time that building reaches its life of 100, 200, 250 years, 5, 6, 7, 8 more trees actually have grown at that point. And you actually don't need to replant trees. They actually drop their own seedlings. So if you do a clear cut, and that's what it's called, in just a section, you don't mow the whole thing down, and then you're just mowing down a section at a time, and then you allow those trees to grow, and then you move on to the next section. And there's also, there's incentives economically to do it responsibly as well, because most of these trees in the United States, all of them, they're all privately owned. So it's not like if they take down all their trees, they're done. They're out of business at that point. Canada's a little bit different, where their forests are actually government owned. So they also recognize it as a natural resource as well. So basically, if you're specifying a species in North America, it's being done sustainably currently.
That's really.
And actually, our forest, we're actually overforested right now. And so the USDA actually is one of our main funders because they actually want us to use more wood for building purposes.
So that will clear the space, and in case of fires, you kind of can compartmentalize the fire
Yep.
because it doesn't travel one place to the other. That's
Yep.
really,
Yeah, and
so, you know,
overgrown forests, obviously, they can add for fires, but old trees actually don't do a whole lot. They don't pull carbon out of the atmosphere,
mm,
things like that as they grow older. And they also don't allow younger trees to grow because they just provide too much shade. So it's actually the cycle, it actually stops the cycle if you let an old growth forest just sit there.
what is an old tree? Like how old is what makes an
It,
old tree, you know?
it depends on the species, I guess, but yeah, a couple hundred years old.
Wow. So
Yep.
that's amazing. So not okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking about 40, 50 years, but you're like, no, if you're 100 years. That's
Yeah,
quite
it
incredible.
depends. It does depend on the species. So like the
Mhm.
sequoias out west that are huge,
They're
they're
famous, yeah,
a
they're
couple.
famous, of course. But you don't use them for building material.
No,
I do
nope.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Very cool. So, how do you, Mark, as someone who's really has his hands on the pulse, how do you see the future, the next 5 and 10 years inside wood construction?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is people are going to continue to build out of light framed wood. So two by fours, two by sixes, multifamily buildings, small commercial. Due to economics, it just costs less. So it's
Yeah.
nothing
Do
beats
you know
that in
the
terms of
difference,
cost.
by the way? Do you know the difference between, let's say, if
Yeah,
in New York you build between $300 to $500 square foot in full project, how much will the cost shrink if someone, if someone jumps on, a construction with wood material versus concrete?
yes. So a light frame wood building is going to be about 25-30% cheaper on the installed structure.
Wow.
So it's
Wow.
it's pretty significant, and
It
it
is. It
fluctuates.
is.
Right now, the cost of wood is up, so that number's probably down a
Mhm.
little bit lower. So it
And
does
by
go
the
up and
way,
down
we've
because
been
it's a commodity.
following. Yeah, I want you to, before I forget, I would love you to address whether right now but we've seen, so one of the benefit of a mass, we constantly see what people are buying and selling. So we started to collect more and more data. I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've seen a jump of like 25% in cost of lumber in the last like 3, 4 months. What's the source of that problem?
It's mostly COVID related because everyone was at home doing projects and buying wood. That's
Oh,
the
so it's
biggest
not,
reason.
so it's not logistic that there's not enough people in the factories, not enough truck drivers. You think it's because everybody's at home and people are renovating, so they just have way too much demand versus traditional supply.
Yeah, it's that, and then yeah, a little bit of furloughs and things like that. But the biggest thing was, I mean, everyone who was stuck at home, is doing a project on their house or
Yeah,
their
you're sitting.
backyard or an
Exactly.
addition or
Yeah,
whatever it might be.
yeah, you're sitting at home, go like, I always wanted to fix that. Now I have
Yeah,
time to, right? So you go to Home Depot or Lowe's and you pick up some wood. So
yeah,
you see it as a temporary issue, not an ongoing problem with
yeah,
cost.
yeah. And I
Mhm.
mean that, the percentage that it went up, it sounds a lot, and of course it is for someone who's going to buy it, do it themselves. But really, the labor is so much higher that price
Mhm.
increase really it's not negligible, but it's so much
Yeah, but
smaller than the cost.
insignificant to the total cost of the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. Cool, Mark. So jumping back to what I asked you before. So you're saying 25% give or take of cost saving by using wood. How do you see trends and how do you see the next 5 and further, even 10 years from now, construction changing inside your specialty in the wood usage?
The biggest change is on the mass timber exposed stuff that I was talking about before. So that in terms of cost, that's actually going to be comparable to steel and concrete, plus or minus, depending on the location. The late frame stuff is really what's far more economical. That's the biggest change. So people are using that more and more. And then the building code is actually about to change next year to permit high-rise buildings out of wood. It has to be these solid mass timber pieces, but you'll be able to go up to 18 stories with these mass timber
Wow.
elements.
And that is
They'll
that in your area in Massachusetts, or that's across the country or
it's
Northeast? What's the
it's whoever, so every state's on a different code cycle, but they're all under the International Building Code, and
mm,
everyone adopts it at a different time. So whoever wants to adopt it's called the 2021 International Building Code, those provisions will be in there. A few states have already adopted early. Oregon, Washington, Utah, the city of Denver did. Um, there's one down south that's looking at as well. Massachusetts is looking at adopting as soon as possible next year. I don't know if COVID's going to affect that. Maine's looking into it as well. Of course, they don't have a whole lot of high rises in Maine,
Yeah.
but so it's what I mean. It's just a matter of whenever people adopt, that next code. Basically, California is
Mm.
going to adopt a year early as well.
Yeah. And there's no fire code issue there because the wood is treated properly um,
Yep.
to,
Yeah.
to sustain the
It,
fire.
yeah. I won't get into the weeds of it, but depending on how many stories you have, depends on the percentage of wood that you have to cover up for fire
Mm.
protection.
I got you. That's really good. And by the way, does Europe use more woods for construction or less than the US?
They use more, so these mass timber products that I'm talking about, they're probably about 15 years ahead of us. So they have thousands of these buildings over there.
I got you. And it's working and they're dealing with fires and everything.
Yeah.
Last thing. Well, it seems to be if cost goes down because of usage of wood versus other material, your your competition will come maybe from fabricated material like a prefab construction. Because this is another trend that is growing really fast. We're seeing it on mass material. More and more factories will make everything and then ship it to those urban dense areas and less labor work, just kind of Lego like build it. Does wood fit into that world? Do you know any companies that build from wood into prefab
Yep.
material?
Yeah, there's
Structure?
two. I guess there's two subsets of that. So there's modular light frame wood, so boxes that are shipped and stacked into like multifamily buildings,
Yep.
and then the mass timber products. Two of them, actually, there's more than two, but the two main ones are cross laminated timber that I mentioned, and then nail laminated timber. They're both similar products, but they come prefab. They're about 8 feet to 10 feet wide by as much as 50 feet long, shipped on a truck and
Well,
just stacked into place. That's why you're getting that savings in time because it's shipped to the site. You pick it up with a crane, drop it in place. You're screwing it down, and then unlike concrete and steel, where you have to wait for concrete to cure 7 days, you're
yep.
jumping on to the next story the next day. So you really, the savings is definitely there in terms of time.
Yeah, I'm always amazed every time I travel. And again, as a New York ex developer, I would say I always amazed when I see those. You see five guys with a nail gun, and you just hear ta 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 ta, and like you see the whole place being built within days. Which in New York we have to wait and weather and special mix in the when the temperature drops, etc. So you're probably dealing with the same thing, Boston. That's really amazing. Mark, that was a really great technical conversation. I'm so thrilled because some of the conversations we have are very kind of general about the market, but with you, we really get a chance to dive into the fascinating material. And I must tell you that I always had this uneducated notion that wood is not good for environmental issues, and it's kind of like we cut in trees. And then I went to the website and started read about this stuff as a preparation for today's conversation. It's actually fascinating. So really, thank you for sharing with it. Anything you want us to, any resources you want to share with us about how to find any more information? By the way, I don't know if you know, but Amass has a whole fast-growing library around construction materials. So we actually have a community with thousands of people visiting and looking for articles. So I'm going to reach out to you, or our team going to reach out to you and ask you for articles about that subject after this conversation, so people can actually read more. But any other places you think people should visit, check out to hear about what you guys are up to?
Yeah, I think the best place is our website. So we have events, and I'm sure you've seen a ton of resources there. I'm your second resource. So if anyone has questions, I'm completely free, by the way. So I'm like a free consultant.
Yeah.
So if anyone has wood
Oh, cool.
questions, I don't.
So you actually do consulting. So if any of our developers, buyers, GCs seeing this conversation, I saw you on the website. So your website, I'm not going to repeat it now, but I'm going to make sure that we have a tag and a website link to your, so they can just reach out to you
Yep.
and see. That's great. Well, Mark, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. I hope
Okay.
your first Instagram live experience was as great as it was for us. And
Yep.
I'm sure we'll keep in touch, right?
Yeah, it went smooth, and thanks for having me. And everyone have a good weekend.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Mark. Talk very, very
Okay.
soon. Bye.
All right.
Take
Bye
care.
now.